In the last lesson, we looked at the angels which are entrusted with death and with taking the souls of the people. And so this naturally leads us into the topic of the punishment of the grave and the affairs that take place in the grave. So in this regard, Imam al-Tahaawiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, after saying, وَنُؤْمِنُ بِمَلِكِ الْمَوْتِ الْمُوَكَّلِ بِقَبْضِ أَرْوَاحِ الْعَالَمِينَ, that we believe in the angel of death, which is entrusted with taking the souls of the worlds, meaning those who have souls from amongst the alameen, from amongst the worlds. He then says after that, وَبِعَذَابِ الْقَبْرِ لِمَنْ كَانَ لَهُ أَهْلًا, and likewise we believe in the punishment of the grave for the one who is deserving of that. وَسُؤَالِ مُنْكَرٍ وَنَكِيرٍ فِي قَبْرِهِ عَنْ رَبِّهِ وَدِينِهِ وَنَبِيِّهِ, and likewise the questioning of Munkar and Nakir in his grave about his Lord, his religion and his Prophet. على ما جاءت به الأخبار عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وعن الصحابة رضوان الله عليهم, upon what has come in the narrations from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and from the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them. وَالْقَبْرُ رَوْضَةٌ مِّن رِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ أَوْ حُفْرَةٌ مِّن حُفَرِ النِّيرَانِ, and the grave is either a garden from the gardens of paradise or it is a pit from the pits of the hellfire. So this passage, we'll remain with this passage for a couple of lessons inshallah ta'ala, and we have here just some remarks from Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala, Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, and I'll quickly summarize this because a lot of this material we covered in the previous lesson or the previous lessons. And so Shaykh al-Albani, first of all, he makes the point here that the punishment of the grave is for both the disbelievers and the sinful Muslims. And these affairs are textually stated in the Quran. The punishment for the disbelievers is textually stated in the Quran, in verses of the Quran, that when they arrive at death, that there will be that which incorporates the punishment of the grave. And likewise for the Muslims, the sinful Muslims, there are hadith which are very, very many, which have reached the level of tawatur. And so in those narrations, the punishment of the grave for sinful Muslims is also mentioned. And so therefore it is obligatory to believe in that. As for delving into how it is, its kayfiyah, then the aql, the reason, does not have any ability to come to know that, to come to have that knowledge. And this is because there are 2 points. First of all, that we accept that the legislation of Islam has not come with anything that the intellect deems to be impossible. Right? So there's nothing in the Sharia, in the legislation, which the intellect can deem to be impossible. The intellect does not have that capacity to make anything impossible in the Sharia. And secondly, that there are things which have come in the legislation which might bewilder the person's mind, might bewilder a person's intellect. This is how we understand these issues of the unseen. These issues cannot be denied by way of reason, because reason does not have that ability and that capacity to reject and make these things to be impossible. But at the same time, these things, or many of these things, they bewilder a person's intellect, meaning that they bewilder him in the sense that he's unable to fathom them. So, the correct position towards these affairs is to make taslim, which is to submit and to believe in them and to affirm one's faith in them. So this is the essence of the statement of Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullahu ta'ala. And then Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, he says that belief in the final day, when we speak of al-imanu bil-yawm al-akhir, belief in the final day, al-iman bil-yawm al-akhir, that everything which comes after death automatically enters into belief in the last day. So therefore, when we see in the 6 pillars of Iman, which includes al-imanu bil-yawm al-akhir, Iman in the last day, incorporated within that is everything which happens from the point of death onwards. Death, punishment of the grave, the bliss of the grave, resurrection, the presentation of the deeds, the reckoning, the scales, giving the scrolls, paradise, hellfire, all of that is incorporated within belief in the final day. And he says all of this is from the affairs of the unseen. We can't enter it with our intellects, we can't fathom that and understand that, but we just depend upon what has come in the book and the sunnah. And then he mentions from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala that the places or the abodes are 3 in number. Darud-Dunya, which is the abode of this life, and this is the place in which there is action and like kasab, al-amal wal-kasab, which is action and earning. Then there is Darul Barzakh, which is a place in which a person is kept. Right? In other words, he's deferred up until he's resurrected. And this is the second abode. And the third abode is Darul Qarar, which is the permanent abode, which is paradise or hellfire. And that's why Allah says in the Quran, وَإِنَّ الْآخِرَةَ هِيَ دَارُ الْقَرَارِ. Indeed, the hereafter is the home of permanency and the home of permanent establishment. So the Shaykh goes on to say that when the person is put in the grave and buried, and the people turn away from him, he hears their footsteps, as is mentioned in the hadith. At that point, his soul is brought back to his body. And this type of life here is a type of life that no one knows its reality except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is powerful over all things. But after his soul is returned back to his body, he's given a different type of life, a type of life that we don't understand. And then angels come to him. 2 angels come to him. And they ask him those well-known questions. Who is your Lord? What is your religion? Who is your prophet? And so if he answers with the correct answer, he will succeed. And if he answers, and his grave will become like a garden from the gardens of paradise. And on the day of judgment, he will become from the people of paradise. And if he is hesitant in the answer and he doesn't answer properly, then his grave will become a pit from the pits of the fire. It will be constricted against him until his ribs cave in like this. And it will become very narrow for him. So this is the statement of Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, and the Sheikh goes on to mention many of the evidences in the Quran. I will mention some of them very briefly here for the punishment of the grave. So the first evidence here is regarding the people of Fir'aun in Surah Ghafir, Surah 40, verse number 46. This is an evidence for the punishment of the grave for the people of disbelief. Because remember we mentioned that in the Quran there are evidences for the punishment of the grave for the people of disbelief. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, النَّارُ يُعْرَضُونَ عَلَيْهَا غُدُوًّا وَعَشِيًّا وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ أُدْخُلُوا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ أَشَدُّ الْعَذَابِ. He says, the fire will they be subject to morning and evening. So they are subject to a fire morning and evening. And then when they are raised, on the day that they are raised, the day that they are established, it will be said, enter the people of Fir'aun into the most severe punishment. So you have 2 punishments. The punishment in the morning and evening, that is mentioned at the beginning of the verse. And then it mentions they will, on the day that the hour is established. This means the hereafter. It will be said, enter them into the most severe of punishments. That clearly establishes 2 punishments. The first one is in the grave, and the second one is in the hereafter. Second verse, which is a proof, is Surah At-Tur, Surah 52, verse number 48. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَإِنَّ لِلَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا عَذَابًا دُونَ ذَلِكَ وَلَكِنْ أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Here, Allah said, indeed for those who did wrong, who committed dhulm, there will be a punishment, عَذَابًا دُونَ ذَلِكَ, a punishment less than that one. So this punishment, what is mentioned, the lesser punishment, is referring to the punishment of the grave. Meaning that this is a punishment less than the one that is actually awaiting them. So this is one of the explanations of this verse, that it refers to the punishment of the grave. Another verse which is a proof is in Surah As-Sajdah, Surah 32, verse number 21. Verse number 21. In this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَلَنُذِيقَنَّهُمْ مِنَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَدْنَى دُونَ الْعَذَابِ الْأَكْبَرِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ. That we shall give them a taste of the lesser punishment. There is less, the punishment which is less than the greater punishment, in order that they may return. And so al-adhab al-adna here is the punishment of the grave, and the al-akbar is the punishment on the day of judgment. These are some of the numerous verses. We'll look at some more later on, inshallah ta'ala, when we look at the commentary of Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh. Well, these are 3 or 4 verses. And as for in the Sunnah, which mentions punishment for sinful Muslims, the numerous ahadith. From them is the statement of the Messenger of Allah when he walked past 2 graves, and he said, indeed they are being punished, and they're not being punished for anything, major. And he said, and then he said, rather it is something that is major, meaning that it's not major, but it is major. It is not light, but it is at the same time. It is not grave, but it is at the same time grave. So he says, for one of them, it is the one who would make namima. Right? He would carry tales between the people. And the other one, he would not take care of himself when urinating, when relieving himself. And likewise, the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ would seek refuge, he would say, أعوذ بالله من عذاب جهنم ومن عذاب القبر وَمِن فِتْنَةِ الْمَحْيَا وَالْمَمَاتِ وَمِن فِتْنَةِ الْمَسِيحِ الدَّجَّالِ. I seek refuge in Allah from the punishment of the hellfire, and from the punishment of the grave, and from the tribulations of life and death, and from the tribulation of Al-Masih ad-Dajjal, from the tribulation of ad-Dajjal. So these are some of the evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah which establish belief in the punishment of the grave. As for Sheikh Salih al-Sheikh, then he says that in the sentence that we read at the beginning of the lesson is an affirmation of that which we are obliged to believe. If you look at the sentence, it contains the essence of what we are supposed to believe. We believe in the punishment of the grave for the one who is deserving of that, and the questioning of Munkar and Nakir about his Lord, his religion, and the Prophet, and upon what has come in the narrations from the Messenger of Allah ﷺ and his companions, may Allah be pleased with them. So we believe, therefore, that in the grave a person is being punished or being rewarded, or he is being punished continuously up until the resurrection, or he is being rewarded continuously up until the resurrection. And this is a foundation of our belief in the punishment of the grave. Likewise, in the questioning of the 2 angels and the trial in the grave, the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Mutawatir Hadith have established this. And this is something which is rejected. The reason why this issue has been mentioned in the books of Creed, and why it is repeated often, and it is treated independently from other topics, is because groups from the Mu'tazila, from the Jahmiyyah, from the Falasifa, the philosophers, and likewise those people who are from the people of Kalam, they deny the punishment of the grave. And they deny the question in the grave. And they deny the tribulation in the grave. The fitna, the su'al, and the adhab. They deny all these things. Why is it that they deny these things? Well, a number of things. First of all, we know that these people, they are known to reject the Sunnah. So the Mu'tazila, the Ahlul Kalam in general, the Jahmiyyah, likewise the philosophers, all of them reject the Sunnah. They have their own reasons for rejecting the Sunnah, first of all. And secondly, anything they find in the Quran that points to this belief, they will make ta'weel of those verses, just in the same way that they make ta'weel of the verses that relate to Allah's attributes. They do the same with the issue of the punishment of the grave. And so, a number of points. First of all, the first point regarding this is, first of all, the punishment of the grave is a matter which is from the unseen, and things which are from the unseen can only be faced with belief. So in other words, all of these things from the unseen which we have been informed of, how do his faculties that he has been given, how do they respond when he's informed of these things by way of revelation? There's only one way, and it is al-i'tiqad. It is belief. It is belief. Why? Because these things, we obviously we cannot see these things, we cannot perceive these things, and therefore because we can't see and we can't hear and we can't feel and perceive these things, they're outside of our senses, then it is impossible for the aql, the intellect, in order to grasp these things. It's impossible. Why? Because the aql, the intellect, is something, we see something, we observe something with the senses, and then we start making analogies in our minds with the things that we have perceived. Right? So because these are from the unseen, they are impossible to be seen, then it's not possible for the intellect to actually grasp the realities. And so the only way that a person behaves towards these affairs is simply at-taslim wal-iman wal-i'tiqad. Submission, belief, and faith. That's the first thing. And the second thing, the evidences in the Quran and the Sunnah have clearly indicated that punishment in the grave and reward, bliss in the grave, will take place, and the questioning and the tribulation. And all of these evidences are, the meaning which comes from them is from evidences which are mutawatir, that they are mutawatir, either in the Quran or in the Sunnah. That all of these evidences have told us together that once you die and you enter the barzakh, there is punishment and reward. And the third point regarding this, or the third angle, is that when we look at the people who oppose this belief, what is it that has led them to oppose this belief? First of all, what they do is they see the world which is seen, right? So they look at the world which is seen, which we can observe, and then they make analogies for the things that we cannot see. And then when these affairs have come in the Quran and the Sunnah, meaning the affairs of the unseen that we cannot see, they basically try to analogize from them from the things that can be seen. For example, in the hereafter we know that the actions of a person will be weighed. Right? The actions of a person will be weighed. Now, in the life of this world, they look into the affairs of what can be seen, and you ask, well, how can a person's action be weighed? How can a person's action be weighed? Like, for example, someone is sitting there and an impulse comes to his mind to go and commit a sin, and then he struggles against his soul and his heart, right? And he withholds from that temptation and he doesn't commit a sin, right? This is counted as an action in the Sharia, right? He has made a tark, he's made an abandonment. This is now a fi'l, he's committed an action. He will be rewarded for that action, and that action will be weighed. How can that be weighed? It's impossible in the life of this world to actually weigh that thing, right? So now they've made it impossible because they are analogizing from the things that they see in this world. It has now become impossible to them. And so therefore, when we find what has come in the texts of the Sharia, in the Quran and the Sunnah, they therefore deny these texts because they cannot be, according to them, that they cannot be understood. Because it can't be understood, because it is not rational, because we cannot fathom it, therefore it cannot be correct. And so therefore they have different approaches. If it's in the hadith which is, ahad, they will reject it. If it's mutawatir, some of them will reject it as well because they reject the Sunnah outright, or others will interpret it. And if it's in the Quran, they will twist and distort the Quran. So, because of these three reasons which have been given here, this issue of this belief of the punishment of the grave has been deliberately mentioned on its own in the books of the Sunnah, in the books of Creed. Why? In order to oppose these misguided innovators from the Jahmiyyah, the Mu'tazila, and the Falasifa, and likewise from the the people of Ilmul Kalam in some of them, not all of them. So for that reason, Imam al-Tahawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned that from the traits of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah is to believe in the punishment of the grave. And he said, عَلَى مَا جَاءَتْ بِهِ الْأَخْبَارُ عَنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, upon what has come in the narrations. Why? Because we refer back to the narrations. The narrations are a hujjah. And likewise what has come from the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. So this now moves us on to some other proofs. There are more proofs from the Quran and from the Sunnah, and we'll just quickly list them. The first of them is the verse that we've already looked at previously about Fir'aun and his people, Surah Ghafir 40 verse 60. A verse that we didn't mention before is Surah At-Tawbah, Surah 9 verse 101. سَنُعَذِّبُهُمْ مَرَّتَيْنِ ثُمَّ يُرَدُّونَ إِلَىٰ عَذَابٍ عَظِيمٍ, that we shall punish them twice. They shall be punished twice. Then they shall be returned to a mighty punishment. That twice that is mentioned there incorporates the punishment of the grave. And likewise, the ayah in Surah Al-Anfal, Surah 8 verse 50, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذْ يَتَوَفَّى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا الْمَلَائِكَةُ يَضْرِبُونَ وُجُوهَهُمْ وَأَدْبَارَهُمْ وَذُوقُوا عَذَابَ الْحَرِيقِ ذَلِكَ بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ. If only you see when the angels take the souls of those who disbelieve, striking their faces and their backs, and they will taste a punishment. So meaning at the point of the souls being taken, what does it say? It says that al-malaikatu yadribuna wujuhahum wa adbarahum, striking their faces and their backs. This is clear that from the point of death there is punishment. And likewise the other ayah in Surah Al-An'am, Surah 6 verse number 93, وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذِ الظَّالِمُونَ فِي غَمَرَاتِ الْمَوْتِ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ بَاسِطُوا أَيْدِيهِمْ أَخْرِجُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ الْيَوْمَ تُجْزَوْنَ عَذَابَ الْهُونِ بِمَا كُنْتُمْ تَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ غَيْرَ الْحَقِّ وَكُنْتُمْ عَنْ آيَاتِهِ تَسْتَكْبِرُونَ. If only you see when the oppressors are in the throes of death and the angels stretch out their hands and say, bring out your souls. Today will you be recompensed with a humiliating punishment on account of what you used to say about Allah other than the truth, and you used to be arrogant in the face of His signs. The part in this verse is when Allah said, Al-yawma tujzawna adhab al-hun. On this day will you be made, will you be recompensed with a humiliating punishment. This day where is mentioned here, al-yawma tujzawna, the day here is related to the day on which the soul is taken out from the body. Right? So it is said, al-yawm tujzawna. Why? Because the ayah is speaking about when the angels, if only you could see when the oppressors are in the throes of death and the angels stretch out their hands and they say, bring out your souls. Today will you be recompensed with a humiliating punishment. Right? So means the word today here is referring to the day that the angels are taking out, the soul is coming out. Which means that from that point, they will be recompensed with punishment right through the barzakh and when they are resurrected. Right? So that's another proof in the Quran for the punishment of the grave. It is an evidence for the beginning of the punishment, the beginning of the life of the barzakh. And also the ayah that we mentioned previously, Surah At-Tur, verse number 48, that's also mentioned again. So we can see from this that we have basically 6 or so verses in the Quran, all of which indicate the punishment of the grave. And likewise in the Sunnah, many evidences, collectively they all reach the level of tawatur. So from those evidences is the hadith al-qabru rawdatun min riyadil jannah aw hufratun min hufarin nar. That the grave is either a garden from the gardens of paradise or a pit from the pits of hellfire, that At-Tahawi mentioned in his statement. Likewise, the hadith which mentions the questioning of the grave, who is your Lord, who is your Prophet, what is your religion. Likewise, the hadith that we mentioned previously, that the Messenger passed by 2 graves, that the Messenger passed by 2 graves and they were being punished. Also the hadith of the one who is unable to answer the question, that he will be struck with an iron mace, and he will let out a scream that every animal can hear except the jinn and the men. And also the hadith, if it had not been that you would cease to bury your dead, I would have asked Allah to make you hear the punishment of the grave. If it hadn't been that you would stop burying your dead, لولا ألا تدافنوا لسألت الله أن يسمعكم عذاب القبر. I would have asked Allah to make you hear the punishment of the grave. And likewise, what we find in the Salatul Janazah of the various supplications that the Prophet would make and that we make when we pray the Janazah, in which we make dua for the deceased and we ask for him to be saved from the punishment of the grave. And likewise, on an occasion, he made dua for the young person who had not reached the age of puberty, that Allah save him from the punishment of the grave. So the evidences are very, very many. This is just a small sample, very varied, as you can see. And all of this makes it reach the level of at-tawatur. Okay, so once that is established, the evidences for the punishment of the grave, there are a number of issues after this then. And the first issue then is, why is it called Adhab al-Qabr? Why is it called Adhab al-Qabr? This question arises because we find that not everybody is buried. Not everybody is buried. We see that in some religions, or among some people, they don't actually bury the dead. For example, some of them, they burn the dead. We find many instances people might even be thrown in the ocean. In some cultures, in some religious rituals, they throw them into the ocean. Some of them are not buried at all. Some people just die and they decompose. So the way that the people die is very varied. They're not all buried. But overwhelmingly, when we look at most of the nations of the world, and historically, most of the nations have actually, they bury the dead underground, right? So because it is overwhelmingly the case that graves are used to bury the dead, then the word Adhabul Qabr has been used, although in reality it is Adhabul Barzakh. Why? Because when you die, you move into the barzakh. That is the next stage of life. And most of the people end up in the grave, but also many people, for whatever reasons, they're not in the grave. Their bodies decompose, or they are burned and cremated, they are thrown in the ocean. So the point being is that it's not tied to the grave, it is tied to the second stage of life, basically. It's another stage of life. So in reality, what we are speaking of is Adhabul Barzakh and Na'imul Barzakh, the reward and the punishment in the Barzakh. And as we mentioned, life is of three types: Al-Hayatul Dunya, Wal-Hayat Al-Barzakhiyah, and likewise the Hayat, which is of the Akhirah. The life of the world, the life of the Barzakh, and the life of the hereafter. So what is intended here is the life of the barzakh, whether a person is burned or not burned, whether he has been buried or not buried, whether he has been made to dust, whether he's been eaten even. People get eaten. People get eaten by crocodiles. They get eaten even by snakes, large, snakes which swallow them. So, his parts might decompose, or they might be thrown into the ocean. All of these are different scenarios. However, every single one of them has now entered the life of the barzakh. And the scholars, therefore, in light of this, they say that Adhab al-Qabr is so called from the angle of at-taghlib. At-taghlib meaning that this is the majority situation, though not everybody is, buried in the grave. So then at-Tahawi said, liman kana lahu ahlan, for the one who is deserving of that. So we affirm the punishment of the grave for the one who is deserving of that. This is in Allah's knowledge, in Allah's knowledge. Allah knows who is deserving of that and who is not. And so this leads us to the second point, which is that the punishment of the grave is applied to a person in both his body and his soul. In his body, his jasad, and likewise his ruh. They are combined in the grave, and both punishment and likewise reward as well, they apply to both the body and the grave. And so we find that the body has a connection to the soul. There's a connection even though we don't understand it, but there's a connection that is with the body and the soul. And the scholars explain that in the life of this world, there is a connection between the body and the soul. And then in the barzakh, there is a connection, but it's a different type of connection. It's a different type of connection to the one which is in this world. But the point that we believe in is that punishment is for the body and the soul together. The third point is that there are a number of different sayings on this issue about punishment in the grave. And so the first view is the view of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah, that punishment and reward takes place on the soul and the body together. This is the view of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. The second view are those who say that only the soul is punished. Only the soul is punished. This is the view of the Mu'tazila, the Ash'aris, and even some people from some of the people of Ahlul Sunnah may have said this saying. And likewise, from the people who said this saying is Ibn Hazm al-Andalusi. That's the second view, that it's only the soul. And the third view is that the punishment is for the body and the soul so long as the body has not decomposed. Right? So the body will be punished up until it is decomposed and perishes. Once it's decomposed and perishes, that punishment for the body will stop, and then the soul will continue to be punished. Right? So that's the third view that is held by some others. So obviously the correct view is the first view of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, and this now leads us to the final thing that we'll finish today's lesson off with, inshallah ta'ala, which is just looking at the connection between the soul and the body. The connection between the soul and the body. And so basically there are four different types of connection between the soul and the body. Four different types of connection. The first connection is the connection between the soul and the body before birth. Before birth and after the soul has been blown into the body. Right? So we're talking now after the 3-month period, the 40, and then the 120 days when the soul is blown into the body. Now, at this point, the soul has been blown into the body, into the fetus, and it is the connection here now, the ta'alluq between the ruh and the jasad, the soul and the body, is a very weak connection. It's a very weak connection. There are no, like here, there is no idrak, like ability to perceive, ihsas, ability to feel, like the senses. It's actually a fetus in the womb of the mother. It does not know crying. It does not know laughter. All of these things take place afterwards. So at this point, the connection is very weak after the soul has been breathed into the fetus. The second stage is the connection between the soul and the body after birth. This now when the child has been born. Now what happens is that the soul, the connection of the soul with the body is that the soul, it basically grows, its knowledge grows, its ability to perceive things and to know things in the passing of time. And likewise, it's the fitrah that is part and parcel, the tawheed, knowledge of shirk. It's something that will evolve over time if left alone. Right? So all of the senses are developing, and this fitrah is there. And if it is left, it will proceed upon Tawheed. Otherwise, it will be its parents who will make it a Yahudi or a Nasrani or a Majusi, who take it away from its fitrah. Otherwise, by way of ta'lim, by way of education, the soul grows and its connection to the body becomes more and more firm and established. And so therefore, the body is the one that perceives and feels things, senses things, but the soul is also affected and the soul is there as well. Then we have the third stage. Now these two stages are in the life of this world. The fourth stage is in the barzakh. Now we are in the barzakh. What is the connection between the soul and the body? Well, here the connection goes the other way around. In the life of this world, after birth, the body is the foundation. The body is the asal. Right? So the body is what feels the pains and whatever else, and the soul feels it as a consequence. And that's why you feel physical pain, and then you start feeling anxiety and stress and depression and things that harm the soul. Right? So the body is the asal, and the soul suffers as a consequence. That's the situation in the life of this world. In the barzakh, it's the other way around. The soul is the foundation. The soul is the foundation in the barzakh. The soul is the foundation of life, and the body is the branch. Whereas in the life of this world, it's the other way around. The body is the branch, and the soul is the body is the foundation, and the soul is the branch. Whereas it becomes the other way around in the barzakh. So therefore, when the soul is receiving pleasure and bliss, it goes onto the body, transfers over to the body as well. And the other way around, when the soul feels punishment, the body is affected by it as well. In contrast to the life of this world, the body feels pleasure and pain, and it gets transferred to the soul as a consequence. So this is the third stage, and then the final fourth stage is in the hereafter. And this is where both the body and the soul will attain completion, meaning that they will both be, just like the soul is the asal in the grave and the body is the asal in the life of this world, that will be combined, and there will be a new, more complete ability to perceive and feel pleasure and pain. Right? So it will become complete and perfect, because they will come together. The ta'alluq will be akmal. It will be more perfect and more complete. Why? Because the soul now will be eternal, and the body now will be eternal. And because of that, their ability to perceive and feel like pain and pleasure will become enhanced. And the body will never perish, nor will the soul ever perish. The life between them has become a perfect life. So in other words, the people of paradise will feel things in the perfect of ways. No death. And the people of hellfire will feel things in the perfect of ways. No death in the hellfire. So that's the fourth stage. And we'll finish just with a final remark, which is that the soul and the body will argue on the Day of Judgment. There's some narrations from the Salaf which mention that the soul and the body will argue on the Day of Judgment when the reckoning comes. And so the body will say to the soul, "You commanded me with evil, and you prohibited me from good." This is now the body saying to the soul that you commanded me with evil and you prohibited me from good. And the soul will say to the body, if you hadn't acted, then punishment would not have come to you. If you didn't act, the punishment would not have come to you. So then the argument goes to an angel. They come to an angel, and so the angel says to them that indeed you two, the body and the soul, you are like a blind man who cannot see and a sitting man who cannot stand. right? The soul and the body are like a blind man who cannot see and a sitting man who cannot stand. These two men, they've come to a garden which has fruits. And so the one who is sitting, who can see, he says, I see fruits. And I see such and such, but I'm not able to reach and to grab the fruit. And the blind man says, I cannot see anything. I don't see anything that you see. But I am able, because I'm standing, I'm able to reach if you direct me and tell me where to go. So the one who is sitting said, lift me up, and I will grab the fruit for both myself and for yourself. So now what happens is that both of them have acted. Both of them have partaken in the action. In other words, the soul was commanding and prohibiting, and the body was acting, the body was doing. Right? So both of them are guilty. Both of them were actually acting. So the angel said, so therefore, likewise, you are the same. Like these two men, you are exactly the same. So put blame upon both of yourselves. So this is the reality of the soul and the body, the connection between them. We understand it in accordance with what we have mentioned. Beyond that, we don't know its reality. Allah knows best its reality, but we believe in it. We make taslim, we have iman, and we believe in these texts which have come regarding the soul and the body. And so with that, we'll conclude our lesson here today, inshallah. We'll continue. There's more of a discussion still on this passage about the questioning and some of the other issues. So we'll finish with that amount today, and we'll continue in the next lesson, inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.